I drilled discs for 3 years before I understood what the 7th hole was actually for. The Asherin called it the index. They called the building Dranic Crossing, though nothing about it looked like a crossing to me, just a long atrium roofed in clear paneling, skylights pouring flat daylight down onto a dozen intake rows, and at the head of each row a station like mine. A chair, a tray of blank ceramic discs no bigger than a thumbnail, a fine-bore hand drill, and a screen that told me, trait by trait, what to do with the person standing in front of me. I had not chosen the work exactly the way a man chooses a trade. I had been pulled off a transport 3 years before with no papers the Asherin recognized, and the choice they offered me was the only one on the table: learn the drill or join the line on the other side of it. I learned the drill. I told myself, those first months, that a careful pair of human hands at the station was better than whatever the Asherin would put there instead, and I kept telling myself that long after I'd stopped believing it, because by then I needed the lie more than I needed the truth. The other operators on my row were Asherin themselves, mostly junior surveyors working their way up the index by hours logged rather than judgment shown, and they liked having a human at one station the way a kitchen likes having one good knife, useful precisely, because it could be trusted to do the same clean cut every time, without hesitation, without asking the meat what it thought of the matter. I had earned that trust the slow way, one identical motion at a time, for 3 years, and on the morning Leah's Hartman came up the row I still had every bit of it. 7 traits: resilience, compliance, dexterity, fecundity, endurance, sociality, deference. Score above threshold on a trait, the screen marked it open, drill the peg all the way through, leave daylight on the other side. Score below, it stayed closed, a shallow dimple, sealed. 7 pegs, 7 small binary verdicts. And when you held the finished disc up to the window, the pattern of light coming through, it was the whole of a person's worth to the Asherin, reduced to something you could read with your thumb in the dark. 4 open pegs kept you in the resettlement track. 3 or fewer, and the screen printed a different word: withdrawal. Nobody on my row ever said what it meant out loud. We just drilled and clipped the cord through the disc and hung it around the next neck in line, and the line moved, and at the end of every shift I washed the ceramic dust off my hands and told myself the same comfortable lie I'd been telling myself since the first week. The morning the line brought me Leah's Hartman, I had already drilled 40 discs. She came up holding her brother's hand so hard his knuckles had gone the color of the daylight overhead, and she watched my hands instead of my face the whole time the screen ran her numbers. Resilience, closed. Compliance, closed. Dexterity, closed. She was 9 and her hands shook on the grip test bar. Endurance, closed. Sociality, open, barely. Deference, closed. Fecundity, for a child that age, defaulted closed pending later review, which on the disc read exactly like a failing score and counted the same on the line. 1 open peg. The screen printed withdrawal before I had even reached for the drill. I had drilled discs that read withdrawal before. Dozens. I am not going to tell you I never felt anything, because that would be its own comfortable lie, the kind I'd been trading in for 3 years. But on every one of those dozens I had picked up the drill and finished the job, because finishing the job was the only way the line kept moving and the only way my own card stayed clean with the surveyors above me. What I did instead, with Leah's Hartman, was something the Asherin's own ledger said could not exist. The 7th peg, deference, measures whether a subject yields when challenged. The 1st peg, resilience, measures whether a subject holds when challenged. Across however many years of compiling the index, across however many billions of scored individuals on however many worlds, the Asherin's master ledger recorded 0 cases, not one, in which both pegs scored open on the same disc. Their own statisticians had stopped flagging it as a possibility and started teaching it as an axiom. Resilience and deference do not coexist in the same subject. A person who holds does not yield. A person who yields does not hold. It was, as far as I ever understood Asherin science, the closest thing the index had to a law of physics. I drilled the seventh peg open anyway. Her disc had scored closed on deference fair and square. She'd stood through the whole scan without flinching once, which the screen read correctly as resilience and read also correctly as a total absence of yielding. I took the drill, set the bit against the sealed dimple over the seventh trait, and bored it straight through in the same clean motion I had used 40 times already that morning, on a result the machine had never once produced and had no procedure to handle. I clipped the cord through the disc. I hung it around her neck myself instead of letting the line do it. I sent her on. The station screen did not print withdrawal. It did not print resettlement either. It printed 3 words I had never once seen leave that screen in 3 years on the line: indeterminate, escalate, senior calibration. They pulled the whole row's morning intake for review within the hour, which told me plainly enough that nobody above me had seen those words much either. Senior Surveyor Quelth came down himself, which the other operators on my row swore had never happened for an intake review, not once. He held Liz Hartman's disc up to the skylight the way I'd held 1,000 discs up to that same light, turning it slowly, watching the 2 open pegs throw their twin spots of daylight onto his palm. He asked me, through the translation collar, in that flat, unhurried Osherin cadence, how the 7th hole had come to be drilled. I told him the truth, which was also the only lie that stood a chance of surviving him checking. I told him the drill had slipped. He did not believe me. I watched him not believe me, in the particular stillness the Osherin go into when their ledger and their own eyes disagree and neither one will move first. But the drill marks were clean-edged, machine-true, indistinguishable on inspection from every correct peg I had ever bored, and there is no instrument the Osherin trust more than their own equipment. Their law said the combination could not exist. Their tools said it did. An Osherin surveyor faced with that particular contradiction has exactly one procedure available to him, because his own ledger wrote it generations ago for cases nobody expected to occur. When the index and the instrument disagree, defer to the instrument, and route the subject to long-form calibration for restudy rather than to disposal. Restudy meant kept, watched, catalogued, inconvenient to a dozen filing systems, but kept on a world with daylight and food in it, instead of withdrawn from one. Quelth looked at me for a long moment after he gave the order, longer than the paperwork required. I have turned that look over more times than I can count in the years since, and I still don't know whether it was suspicion or something closer to the shape his own species has no peg to score. He never reported me. I think, in the end, he filed the whole incident the only way his training had ever taught him to file something with no category, as data, pending further occurrences, rather than as a violation requiring a punishment his ledger gave him no precedent to assign. I drilled 4 more discs like that one before I was finally moved off the line, 2 years later, for reasons nobody explained to me, and that I learned not to ask about too loudly. 4 more children went to calibration instead of withdrawal on the strength of 1 redrilled peg apiece, and 4 more times Quelth filed it as data and said nothing further. I don't know how many of the 4 are still alive out there. I know that Liz Hartman is, because she found me, 9 years after Dranic Crossing, in a resettlement office 3 systems away from the one we'd met in, and set her own disc down on the counter between us, kept the whole time, cord and all, the 2 open pegs catching the window light exactly the way they had the first morning I ever saw them. She didn't say thank you. She asked me how I'd known the drill wouldn't get caught. I told her the truth this time. I hadn't known anything of the kind. I had only known what their own ledger refused to admit could exist, and that a law with no exception built into it has exactly one weakness in the whole of its design. The day somebody hands it an exception anyway, and dares the law to do something about it.